In the heart of Vatican City stands a figure revered by over 1 billion people worldwide. A man clothed not in gold and power alone, but in a legacy nearly 2,000 years old. He is the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, the Vicar of Christ, and the spiritual leader of the Roman Catholic Church. But who is the Pope, really? Where did this role begin? And how did one man come to wield such vast spiritual, political, and cultural influence throughout history? The origins of the papacy trace back to the 1st century AD, in the heart of the Roman Empire, a world of imperial grandeur, political oppression, and religious upheaval. Within this vast realm, a small and often persecuted group of Jewish followers gathered around the teachings of a crucified rabbi from Nazareth, Jesus. Among them, one man stood out, Simon, whom Jesus renamed Peter, meaning rock. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is recorded as saying, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church," a declaration that, according to Catholic tradition, established Peter as the spiritual foundation of the Christian Church. Over time, Peter made his way to Rome, then the center of the known world, where he became its first bishop, and by extension, the first pope. His life, however, ended in martyrdom during the brutal reign of Emperor Nero. According to early Christian accounts, Peter was crucified upside down, by his own request, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Christ. This took place on what is now known as Vatican Hill. Centuries later, in a powerful testament to his legacy, St. Peter's Basilica was constructed over the site believed to be his final resting place, where pilgrims today still walk the marble halls above the ancient tomb of the man regarded as the Church's first shepherd. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, political chaos swept across Europe. But amid the ruins, one institution not only survived, it grew stronger. Christianity, once a persecuted faith, had become a unifying force, and the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, began to wield not just spiritual authority, but real temporal power. By the Middle Ages, the papacy had evolved into one of the most formidable institutions in all of Europe, rivaling kings and emperors. Pope Gregory I, known to history as Gregory the Great, laid the foundations of this power. A skilled administrator and theologian, he reformed church governance, sponsored missionary work across Anglo-Saxon lands, and established the papacy as a central moral and political force in the post-Roman world. 2 centuries later, the papacy would assert its influence in an unprecedented way. On Christmas Day in the year 800, inside the grandeur of old St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon the head of Charlemagne, proclaiming him Emperor of the Romans. It was a bold, symbolic act, not only reviving the title of a fallen empire, but signaling that imperial legitimacy now came not from blood or conquest, but from the blessing of the Church. The Pope had crowned an emperor, placing himself above thrones. This growing authority would culminate in the person of Pope Innocent III, perhaps the most powerful pope in history. Reigning in the early 13th century, he claimed supreme spiritual and political authority, famously declaring that the Pope stood between God and man, superior even to kings. Under his watch, the Church launched the Fourth Crusade, governed vast swathes of central Italy known as the Papal States, and shaped the very fabric of medieval European life. Through illuminated manuscripts, soaring cathedrals, and ornate papal regalia, the Church projected its authority, not only as a shepherd of souls, but as a sovereign power on earth. With the sweep of a pen or the placement of a crown, the papacy could determine the fate of nations. But no earthly power goes unchallenged, not even one that claims divine authority. In the 14th century, the papacy entered one of its darkest and most tumultuous chapters, the Avignon Papacy. Amid political pressures and instability in Rome, the papal court was relocated to Avignon in southern France, where it remained for nearly 70 years. Here, under the heavy influence of the French monarchy, 7 successive popes ruled not from the Eternal City, but from a fortified palace far from the traditional seat of St. Peter. This exile eroded the universality of the Church and stirred resentment among other European powers. Then, in 1378, a deeper crisis struck: the Great Western Schism. Rival factions within the Church elected different popes, leading to a surreal and deeply destabilizing period in which two, and eventually three, competing pontiffs all claimed to be the true vicar of Christ. The spiritual unity that had once bound Christendom began to unravel. Papal bulls denounced rival popes. Excommunications flew across Europe like arrows. Political alliances hardened along ecclesiastical lines. The papacy, long seen as a source of moral guidance and divine order, became mired in scandal, political manipulation, and bitter infighting. To the faithful, it was a crisis of conscience. To secular leaders, a breakdown of a once central authority. The throne of Peter, once the rock of the Church, now seemed adrift in a sea of corruption and confusion. In 1517, on the doors of a modest church in Wittenberg, a German monk named Martin Luther posted a list of 95 theses, a protest against the sale of indulgences and the growing corruption within the Church. With hammer in hand, he unwittingly struck at the very foundations of papal authority. What began as a call for reform soon ignited a theological revolution. The printing press spread Luther's ideas like wildfire across Europe. The Pope, once seen as the unchallenged shepherd of Christendom, was now openly condemned as a worldly prince, even the Antichrist in some reformers' eyes. In response, Pope Leo X excommunicated Luther, but the tide had already turned. The Protestant Reformation shattered the Church's spiritual monopoly. Entire nations broke away, forming new traditions: Lutheran, Calvinist, Anglican, each rejecting Rome's authority. Wars of religion scarred the continent. For the first time in over a millennium, the Pope was no longer the uncontested voice of Christianity, but a polarizing figure, revered by some, reviled by others. Faced with this existential crisis, the Catholic Church responded with the Counter-Reformation, a sweeping movement of revival and reform. At the Council of Trent, Church leaders reaffirmed core Catholic doctrine and the supreme authority of the Pope. But this was no return to old habits. A new generation of missionaries, scholars, and saints, especially the Jesuits, carried Catholicism across the globe, from the Americas to Asia. Papal power was now asserted not with swords, but through education, discipline, and evangelization. At home, the Church embraced the grandeur of the Baroque, a sensory and spiritual response to Protestant austerity. Art and architecture were harnessed to inspire awe and devotion. And in the heart of Rome, the papacy curated knowledge, preserving its legacy in the vast corridors of the Vatican archives. Modernity brought with it not only industry, war, and revolution, but also a profound transformation of the papacy. In the 19th century, the Papal States, once the physical heart of the Pope's temporal power, were absorbed into the newly unified Kingdom of Italy. By 1870, the Pope had lost his earthly kingdom and retreated behind the Vatican's walls, declaring himself a prisoner of the Vatican. For nearly 60 years, the papacy stood isolated until 1929, when the Lateran Treaty, signed with Benito Mussolini's government, formally established the Vatican City as an independent sovereign state, the world's smallest country, but home to one of its most enduring institutions. As global conflicts erupted, the modern popes stepped into unprecedented roles. During World War II, Pope Pius XII walked a diplomatic tightrope, striving to protect the Church while facing scrutiny over his public silence amid the Holocaust. Then came a dramatic shift in tone and direction. In 1959, Pope John XXII, a figure of warmth and surprising boldness, convened the Second Vatican Council. Over 4 years, bishops from every corner of the world debated the Church's role in a rapidly changing age. The Council opened the windows of tradition to the modern world. The Latin Mass gave way to local languages. Lay people were invited into greater participation, and the Church began to engage contemporary society with a renewed spirit of dialogue and openness. In the final decades of the century, Pope John Paul II emerged as a spiritual and geopolitical force. A Polish priest who had survived both Nazi occupation and Soviet domination, he became the first non-Italian pope in over 450 years, and one of the most influential. His visits electrified millions, and his unwavering opposition to communism is credited with helping spark its fall in Eastern Europe. In 2005, his funeral drew world leaders and mourners alike, a testament to his global reach. The 21st century brought more unprecedented events. Pope Benedict XVI, John Paul's successor, shocked the world by resigning in 2013, the first pope to do so in nearly 600 years. His successor, Pope Francis, made history again, the first Jesuit, the first from the global south, and the first Latin American pope. Known for his humility, his choice to live in a modest guest house rather than the papal apartments became a powerful symbol of change. Emphasizing mercy, climate action, interfaith dialogue, and care for the marginalized, Francis has redefined the modern papacy, not as a throne of power, but as a platform of compassion. The papacy has endured through persecution, power, and profound change. From St. Peter's martyrdom to global diplomacy, the Pope remains a singular figure, at once spiritual shepherd and historical icon. If this documentary inspired you, don't forget to subscribe, give a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which Pope do you think left the greatest mark on history? Let us know, and stay tuned for more journeys through time.